Welcome back to DIY Music Movement. We're up to episode 49, so we're almost up to the half century. So thank you for joining me and for being part of the journey. Today I'm actually mixing things up a little bit and doing something slightly different. And that's that I'm actually going to play a segment of an interview where I was actually the guest. And that is from Ken Burgin, a friend from Sydney. He is a hospitality expert. Whether most musicians realise or not, we're all kind of part of the hospitality world. So it was kind of a good fit. I was actually on Ken's show, Profitable Hospitality, to talk about booking entertainment into venues, particularly in Australia, but I think there's a lot of takeaways for everyone who is involved in a band. And this might be the best insight that I have for you guys to know what the other side of the fence is thinking about. So the venue side, the financial pressures they're under, the expectations they have, maybe a few things you as an artist can do to put yourself in the good books and really work the venues for maximum benefit for everybody. So your band ends up being the go-to band when they have that big support slot or that big national touring act. So I won't take up too much of your time in this introduction. So once again, thank you to Ken for letting me use this portion of the interview. This is only part one, and I'll have the second part of this interview sometime in the next 4 or 5 episodes. It won't be the next one, number 50. I do have something special planned for episode 50. But yes, once again, enjoy this episode. Thanks again to Ken from Profitable Hospitality. And go check out his website if you happen to be a venue manager or someone who is working in hospitality to fill in the time between gigs. It's a great website and a great podcast. So without any further ado, here we go. I've never been a musician that would bend my artistic vision to suit the market, but I also believe it's interesting just to know what the market wants. So I took that approach into my music management for the venue in that I could understand what the venue was after from a financial point of view and as far as building a brand themselves, and also respecting the fact that, particularly if you're dealing with original artists, that the artistry and the credibility that they carry with them is probably the most important thing to them. It's more important than money, particularly when they're just starting out, because there's no expectation of making money. It's all about the artistic credibility. So I was living in both worlds. So
Right, yeah. I've had a bit to do in the past with visual artists, and I remember someone explaining to me when I was just sort of thinking, but, where's the money and why do the people do this amazing work, when they've got no money and no one buys it and everything like that. And this woman explains, Ken, you've just got to understand, it's all about your reputation, the reputation that you have, and, getting that recognition is the single most important thing. I guess that's what you're saying a
Definitely,
bit there. And as so let's talk about you as you're the entertainer, but obviously so you didn't starve. You're also managing venues as well. What type of venues?
Well, the main venue that I managed was in Albury-Wodonga, where I live. So for anyone that's not completely familiar with that, it's on the east coast of Australia between Sydney and Melbourne. It's a little bit closer to Melbourne, right on the highway. And up until a few years ago, you basically had to drive straight through the middle of Albury-Wodonga. It's since been bypassed.
Town of about, 100,000?
Between Albury-Wodonga and surrounding areas. Because I used to, when it came to the venue, depending on the size of the act, we actually used to pull people from Benalla, Wangaratta, up to the Victorian snowfields and all the way to Wagga to certain bands. So the entire area of the Riverina and northeast Victoria is several 100,000 people. So,
right.
Yeah.
That was your catchment area. Yeah.
That was for acts of a national level, and then down to Albury-Wodonga itself is about 130,000 people.
So you were working there as you called the entertainment manager. What was your title?
That was my unofficial title. Yeah,
right.
I took that upon myself because it was really just the events coordinator. But up until that point, the role hadn't been taken that seriously. So in my own mind, I treated it as an events manager because
someone had always been taking the bookings and making sure Tuesday night always had someone on. But you took it further. And what was the expectations of the owners of the hotel? What were they wanting?
It's hard for me to answer that in a holistic way as far as this is what a normal owner of a venue would want, because I happen to be best friends with the owner's son before I even started booking. So their expectation on me was to really break down on just the brand and the credibility of the venue to be able to be the type of music venue outside of a capital city that bigger acts really want to go to and play and enjoy. So the financial expectation on me wasn't the primary.
Okay, so they must have been music fans as well. They obviously
huge music fans. Yeah.
So they wanted a reputation. So you've mentioned that word brand. What's that mean to you? Because I think that's sort of got to come up again a few times when we talk about musicians and venues and things.
Brand to me is the first thing that comes to people's minds when they think of a particular place or object or company, person. It's the impression that someone has about you when they very first think about you.
It's kind of feelings rather than logos. And
yeah, I mean, that's just part of branding. But yeah, the bigger sense, we wanted to be the go-to venue that bigger bands would beg their booking agents to get to play to outside of Sydney and Melbourne. We really wanted to be that venue that was an absolute must stop off when you're touring Australia.
Okie doke. So let's explore that a little bit more. So what were some of the elements that once you really got things going there, what were some of the elements that made that, a must-play venue? And things that, because say we're talking as someone who's got a venue and there's been no entertainment and they want to really get entertainment happening for the first time, give us some advice on how to put it on the map and start to get a great reputation.
I might just say, just before I go into that, my first 3 weeks that I was booking bands by myself, because there was an interim period where I was helping the previous booker before he went overseas. In the first 3 weeks, I was in charge of a Butterfly Effect show, which at the time were a band that would sell out in Albury-Wodonga, and a Kiss Chasey headliner, which also sold out. And they were all in my first few weeks. So it was a baptism by fire for me, and I made a lot of mistakes in those first few weeks.
Did that also mean that you thought anyone you put up, you just sell out, there was easy? Or?
Well, that was in the back of my mind. I didn't realise because the contracts, particularly for those shows, had already been done. So just to maybe talk to your question more directly, Ken, and there's 7 things that I know now that I wished I had have done better myself. And I'd like to talk in just terms of myself because within my own show, DIY Music Movement, I'm not sure if I mentioned that. I think that's probably how you found me. That's why I've managed to develop an audience amongst musicians from that particular podcast, because I'm not afraid to talk about all the mistakes I've made. So these 7 things that I think all venues need to do, a lot of them are from my own mistakes.
Far away.
So we might be parked on this for a little while because I really believe that this is the absolute most important thing for venues, whether they're reevaluating where they're at with their music or entertainment or whether they're going to do it for the first time. And the first thing, and above all else, and that's just to make a commitment to the music genres that you're hoping to feature. And what I mean by that is if, for example, there was another venue in Albury-Wodonga that they went out and they booked 3 or 4 massive bands by Australian standards. And for the rest of the week, they had commercial radio playing, yet none of the bands that they were featuring on the weekends were on commercial radio. They were playing sports all week on the TV. Half the time, the bar itself wasn't actually open and there was no music turned on in the venue. Pretty much the entire day, they were choosing to play songs off CD that weren't anything like the bands that they were hoping to feature. The DJs that they had just weren't like those kinds of bands. So I think you really need to make a commitment to music or it's just not going to work, particularly if you want to be a music venue. I don't think that you can just be a music venue for 2 hours a week and the rest of the time not be interested in music at all. So
Yep, great, excellent.
Moving on from there, and that's that I was a victim of doing this myself, and that's that I would book bands based on my personal taste that I thought were good and that maybe my inner circle of friends that I respected their music taste thought were good. And I never went to our existing customers, staff, the suppliers that might bring people along to see the bands that we had on, any industry contacts that I already had from playing in bands. I never reached out to all of those people, particularly the existing customers, because they're the people that your venue's starting with on your first band. I never bothered to ask them, do you think band XYZ will work well in our venue? How it's set up now with what we do with the rest of the week, with the DJs that we have on the weekend and the jukebox that doesn't have any music like this. I never bothered asking those questions, and I think that is a crucial question.
And after a while, I guess you did start asking those questions. What sort of feedback did you start to get?
If you are brave enough, I guess, to go out there and ask your customers that question, will this band work for our venue and how would you feel about them playing here? You're going to get some really, really candid and honest answers. And just throwing any old band on might not do anything for the totality of your ability to pull people. You might be putting the wrong bands on too often, and you're never going to know that if you don't ask your existing customers.
Did you get contradictory answers from them?
It depended on, I guess, how big the band was. Obviously, if they were a Triple J, because that's very influential in Australia, those are the bands that pull well, or were pulling well in the mid-2000s, were bands that had a lot of Triple J play. When you're talking about bands at that scale, they have enough of their own fans that it kind of would just even out. It didn't matter who they were, they would have enough fans to pull a crowd. But maybe I'm talking more at that slightly smaller touring level where the bands don't have a lot of notoriety. I would suggest not going out and just booking a whole plethora of different styles of bands. And it's a hard question to answer. Was there contradictory answers? There always was, but I guess you would just have to go with what the bulk of your existing customer. And even staff, if your staff aren't interested in the night or the style of music that you're planning on putting on, and you get a lot of pushback on that, that's maybe something to focus on as well, because they're your first point of contact with all the patrons. If they look like they're having a terrible time, it's probably not going to sit too well with your patrons.
They can certainly undermine you if they're not enthusiastic. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I guess moving on from there, I would suggest maybe not overcommitting to having too many genres up front and not having it on too many nights of the week, and just focus on one key night of the week that you're actually committed to building up. Because I think that's probably the biggest flaw that most venues that I've either worked for or talked to is that they want music to work from week one when they might not have had a commitment to music in general in the past. It's probably less key maybe in the comedy genres, because those are more special one-night events where your patrons and your clientele probably aren't expecting to come in during the week and see other references to comedy happening outside of the actual night. Whereas with music, it's kind of an all-or-nothing thing sometimes. You really need to be committed to having
So better to have one night that's kind of overflowing and even turning people away than try and then be tempted to say, wow, this is brilliant, we better do it on two nights. But you're saying resist.
Absolutely. That's very well put, Ken. You put that perfectly. Having one awesome night that's always a great experience, it's always well organised and is reliable to happen. For, in my own case, we would have touring bands on whatever night they happen to fit in, because Albury-Wodonga's not quite a big enough market to demand national level bands on a weekend. But we would always have local content every Friday night if we didn't have a touring act on. And then we would have a DJ that played similar styles of music to what we were booking on a Thursday and a Saturday night, either side of that night, just to buffer. That end of the week was pretty much completely music focused, but yeah, it did all feed back into that Friday night.
Okay, so yeah, good point. So we've got one tremendous live night, but the other, 2 or 3 nights around that are very music focused, but it's just not like one big band. It's
that's pretty much what I'm getting at. And I mean, and that's probably more for a venue that has decided we want to really dive deep into music. Obviously, if you're a venue that maybe already has certain things going with the meal trade, and you might have, who knows, karaoke on one night that's going well and trivia on another night that's going really well, then you might just want to pretty much just focus all your effort just on that one night.
So if you've got karaoke on Tuesday night and trivia on Monday night, are they kind of too far different to, having a strong music concentration on the weekend?
I would say no, because I've seen in my own experience that it actually helps, as long as the karaoke's fun. If you have a very intellectualized environment for either of those 2 nights, then I would probably think that it could be, it's not going to be detrimental to your music night, but it's probably not going to help to build that culture. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a sort of, what we're wanting people to think as part of the branding is there's always something interesting on at the ABC or whatever our
That's
name
exactly
is.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not so much just about music, it's maybe just more about the tone of the venue, that it's going to be consistent when people walk in there.
Yeah.
Because if you're having a heavy metal night on Friday and then you're having on the Saturday night or the Monday night, for example, you might have after work drinks for bankers and accountants in the local district. Those 2 things, for those people that float in and out of a venue during the week, probably isn't going to seem very consistent.
That'll be a bit confusing, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, now what's your next point?
So this is probably one that I made the biggest mistake with, and it's something that I think everyone just has to do. And it's planning, particularly if you've never been involved in the live music space or you're planning on shifting the direction of the type of talent that you have on. And that's to take an inventory of these things. One is your internal talent. So do you have people that know audio, have graphic design skills amongst your staff, or the inner crew? Because every venue that's into music, you'll find that over time people just want to help out the venue, and they'll offer their skills to you, whether they're staff or not. It's just one of the beautiful things about being a live music venue. Whether you've got people that can do video, whether your staff have management experience outside of the venue maybe that they're working at the time, maybe a previous venue that they worked for, they actually did run some events. That might be someone that's good to have running the events on the night. The other thing is to take an inventory of your internal production.
And just on that talent thing too, I think one of the things that's great to find is when you find you've got some detail people, the ones who love checking lists to make sure everything's accurate, because sometimes the artistic mentality is streaking off to the next exciting thing, and meanwhile, something hasn't reconciled or our numbers aren't
exactly
correct
right.
or something. Yeah. Good. You're saying about the...
So that's such a good point. I've kind of lost my way, but the internal production. So we've decided we're going to move into into music with our venue. Do we have PA and lighting, or do we need to hire that? Because that's an exponential increase in cost. Do we have a stage that's suitable for the type of band that we want? The tiny little stage that your Friday night cover band that you had 3 years ago that they were playing on and they were happy with probably isn't going to suit a full production band that's on tour or a well-known comedian. That's probably, or even just someone that's coming to speak in your venue during the week, whatever it is that you're doing for entertainment, it might not be suitable for their type of operation. There's other things to think about, whether you have accommodation and meals available. That will help you to broker deals with bigger acts.
So with the physical infrastructure, is that something that we're thinking about, this venue that wants to, start down the music track? Is that something they can kind of build on progressively, or do they need to make a really solid investment right up front and basically do it right from the beginning?
That's a really tough question. With my experience, we waited too long to get our own PA and lighting.
You were hiring it in? We
were hiring it continuously. Okay. And in the end, the upfront cost, if you're planning on sticking with music for the long term, 3 to 4 years plus, then an upfront investment, if you have the ability and the capital, is always going to be a better option. Obviously, you need to seek someone with audio experience to get the right system for your venue that's going to be able to grow with the size of acts that you have. But there comes an inflection point where PA and lighting can kill live music if you don't have your own system.
Yeah.
And we suffered that every week, that we had a $500-$600 starting cost for every band that we put on.
Right, yes. This is where understanding, there's a capital, if you're prepared to put some capital into it, then your ongoing running costs are actually going to be much more manageable, aren't they?
That's exactly right. So the other thing that I didn't do, and this is the number one biggest mistake that I made when I first took over, and that's that I didn't bother to explore the existing media relations that the pub had that I was working for, the venue. And also I didn't talk to all of the suppliers. And in Australia, for anyone who is Australian, they'll know that live music venues and or venues in general, they've always got promotions going on, whether it's bourbon companies or rum companies or vodka and whatever it happens to be. There's always promotional stuff going on in bigger venues. I didn't make those contacts and
just kind of weren't aware of them, or just decided that was a little bit too commercial, or what was you thinking?
Probably a little bit, getting back to what you said before, when I very first took over, because I'd just come straight out of business school and managing bands, and I was working for a government organisation part-time as well while I was at university. I was probably stuck a little bit too much in the fight the system artistic mindset. I thought, wow, I've got this great job. I'm a venue manager. I put on bands that I love.
No liquor company's going to buy me.
Yeah, that kind of thing, and which is really silly, because every time we paired a great promotion with a particular night, and it was an ongoing commitment both from us to have the night and host it. We had a really successful metal night, which sounds a bit funny if listeners aren't into metal, but there was a super successful night, and that paid our entire security costs for the week.
Yeah, a bourbon supplier would love to be associated with something like that.
That's what I was going to say. We had an amazing relationship with one of our bourbon suppliers. I won't say what brand it was, and he was amazing. He would always give us the same promotions that the city, their select venues in the city were getting.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time we got Red Bull-sized cans, and we sold about 12 slabs of those in one night.
Wow.
And we got begged and begged and begged to get them back, but it was a promotion. I think that's something that all venues need to take stock of is, do we have the internal talent to get little jobs done? Do we have the production that we need to grow? And how are our existing media and promotion-based contacts and sponsorships and the potential of those? They're all great things.
So tell me a bit more about the media contacts that you didn't have and that you now see as so is important.
Well, the pub itself did have them.
Mm-hmm.
I probably never made much of an effort to foster those relationships with the local paper. And in the early 2000s through to the middle 2000s in Albury-Wodonga, the local paper was the be-all and end-all of getting that bump in your crowd.
Right.
Pre-social media.
Papers were still making money. Everyone read the paper. Yeah.
Exactly. It was, if we could land a full-page feature in there, even for a moderate-size act, we would see, I mean, looking back now, I wasn't thinking about it in numbers terms, but it would have been 40 or 50% more ticket sales.
Wow. Huge.
Yep. Particularly for those middle-of-the-road acts.
And did that need a good ad? That needed a good ad? Would they do story, fill up the rest of the page with the story?
We were aiming for features, Ken, so we were trying to get them to cover us. We had a small ad that ran every week. We were never completely convinced that actually did much. I thought it was a waste of $120 a week, but we were aiming to get full-page features.
It's kind of the price of staying friends, though, those sort of things.
They are. That's exactly what we were thinking.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of great features for the first 3 or 4 years. And as I said, for those middle-of-the-road acts that might have, it was a 600-person capacity venue. Depending on how much production was in there, that might drop down to 500 for some of the big bands that like to bring stadium-level production to small towns. And if moderate-level bands were pulling, or entertainers of any kind, 200, 250 people. If we got a full-page feature, maybe 400 plus. So that was super important to us. And I tried my best to foster those relationships, but I guess if you leave the grape on the vine for too long, it's always going to shrivel away and die, I guess, for the lack of a better term. So,
well, if you were back doing that job again, how would you relate to the local paper? I mean, the papers and the role of papers has changed, obviously, but how would you be kind of smarter and wiser with how you'd work with the local paper?
Something I haven't thought too much about in retrospect, but now that I'm thinking about it, the one thing I would do is I would make sure that I went above and beyond, I guess, to let them know how important their support was to our success, not just begging them for more and more features.
Yeah.
And however we could have done that, whether it was having them in on non-band nights maybe for a meal or just even giving them more free tickets to shows that they had an interest in coming to, because we would quite often get asked for the bigger acts for shows from the media. And depends on the contract. Sometimes as a venue you can't go and give away a heap of your own free tickets to different band shows. But there were opportunities that I had early on to some really big acts that I never really capitalised on. So.
Yeah, I think you sort of reminded me of an old saying that I often comes back to me about, make friends before you ask for favours. And, I see this so many times with, restaurants and all sorts of venues, they want to, sort of almost like twist the arm of the local media or whatever to do a story on me, do this, that, the other. Well, they don't even know who you are. You're a stranger who's kind of making all these demands. It's sort of, life doesn't usually work like that.
No, it doesn't.
And as we grow up, we sort of learn about the subtleties of making friends and how people do things for you, don't we?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. So media and suppliers, that was something that obviously you got a lot better.
I did, and I really worked on that element of my own management and building that skill, because live music started to take a slight nosedive around 2006 through to 2009 and beyond in Australia. It was just harder and harder to pull people to get them out of their houses and come to shows. And if I had have worked, I think, harder on those promotional relationships earlier on, we might have been able to, ward off that trend a little bit more.